Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement. On today's video, we're revisiting the Acorn Archimedes 420/1. Since the last video on this, I have gathered a ton of notes up based on lots of information that people emailed me, comments from the last video, and I put those together in a Google Doc to help me really learn how to use this thing. But in today's video, I want to do some maintenance or work to try to get this thing to be easier to use for me. First thing I want to do is I want to try to convert the power supply over to operate on 120 volts. And then I'd like to get the mouse rewired, this Logitech mouse rewired so that it works directly plugged into the keyboard. Then I want to get this IDE interface working. This is a Podule that is a modern IDE interface. And in the last video, I couldn't get that working, so I have the correct commands for that. And lastly, I'd like to convert my Commodore 1084, or one of my Commodore 1084s, to be the Acorn version, the AKF12 monitor. At the end of all that, I'd like to at least try to run one game on this thing because all I did was sort of poke around in the built-in applications in part one, and the IDE interface Podule might have a game or two on here, although I'm not 100% sure. So we'll figure that out once it's up and running, and if worse comes to worse, I could just copy a game onto the floppy disk and we can get it working that way. So that's what I'd like to do in this video. I haven't actually done any of the work yet, so I don't actually know what I'm about to accomplish, so forgive me if I get stuck on any one of these things, but hopefully we can get through all of that and I can get this machine up and running so I can really start using it and learning how it works. So without further ado, let's get right to it. All right, first things first, we need to open this thing up. Now, one of the things that is the problem with this machine, and it's not a big problem, but it's just an annoyance, is all of the fasteners for the Podule covers and the motherboard are missing. Well, there were screws in there, but they were the wrong screws. The screws that were in here were actually held on with hot glue, including the ones for the motherboard, so none of those were right. And I'd really like to find the correct screw so I can get those covers reattached and the motherboard attached properly and, well, not use any hot glue to hold those together. The fasteners that hold down the top cover, I think those are all the correct ones, M3 screws, I think, and those were all fine. They're currently out of the case. And one of the funny things that's really aggravating about taking this thing apart is the cover is really hard to get off. I read the service manual on how to get it apart and it just said take the screws out and slide it backwards. Well, that doesn't really work on this thing. It just gets stuck. So perhaps there is a trick to getting the cover off, or maybe this cover is a little bit bent or something. Generally, I found if I bend it outward a little bit, my thumbs, once I get it started, then I can mostly get this off. But you can see if it's off this much and it's still so stuck, it actually goes on very easily. But as soon as you try to pull it this way, it just binds up. There we go. You'll notice I've already done a little bit of preparation for removing the power supply from the computer. One of the things you have to do is unplug everything from the motherboard, and I mentioned this in part one, but Acorn loves to use these little push-on spade connectors all over the motherboard. Luckily, everything is labeled with a 12 or 5 or -12, so getting this hooked up correctly, again, will be pretty easy. The power to the Podule card, though, on the other hand, that is not labeled, or at least not on the back side. Oh, it's labeled on the front side. Okay, so that's not a big deal. But I just wrote +12, 5, and ground on there just for my own information, for easy connection. And I must admit, I have not done any research ahead of time to see if this modification is even possible, but I fully expect the power supply to be able to be easily modified to operate off 120 volts. The power supply in the BBC Micro and the BBC Master 128 both was trivial to modify to work on 120 volts. It actually had those provisions built in. So I really wouldn't be surprised if Acorn did exactly the same thing with this machine. All right, so power supply is free, but it doesn't come out because it's hitting the fan. And you can't slide it out that way, so I'm gonna have to remove the fan next. Part of me wonders if a fan is even necessary for this machine. This might have been added simply because this one had a hard drive originally, and that will generate a lot more heat than this motherboard. It seems that everything on this computer is extremely low power. I have a feeling the fan's not really necessary. And the fan is quite noisy, so it's not really pleasant as well. Here's a little bracket that was over the fan, and it's pretty corroded from the battery leakage that has affected this computer in the past. So with the fan out of there, power supply comes out relatively easily. Got a lot of signs of corrosion from the leaky battery, but I guess it didn't affect the power supply itself because it still seems to work fine, but look at the mess all over it. And inside the Acorn, things look pretty rough as well. Probably what I need to do down the road at some point is take the motherboard out, take everything out of this thing, and use a wire wheel over the corrosion bits here, and then put some primer down and some new paint, just to kind of stop any future corrosion that's happening from these awful things. Speaking of the batteries, if you watched my video on the BBC Master, I ended up actually replacing the entire NVRAM chip, which happens to be the same one that the PC uses, and I used one of those modern Dallas replacements. So it has a little coin cell on it, and basically it's not going to leak and cause this kind of damage to that machine at some point in the future. Unfortunately, I started looking around on this computer to try to see where the NVRAM chip is. I think it's one of these smaller packages right there. There's a small little crystal there. So yeah, it's something there. That means that you can't easily just use one of those Dallas semiconductor chips on it. And I guess you're going to have some kind of external batteries. Now it's running on 3 volts. So theoretically a coin cell would be fine. But I kind of suspect that the circuit on the machine is not very efficient, because they knew something like a coin cell would be drained relatively quickly. But maybe that's not the case, and a coin cell is totally fine on this and it would last a long time. It just really depends on how they're powering up the clock chip when the machine's turned off like it is here. Anyhow, that is a future problem. For now, let's address this power supply. I found this little piece of something floating around inside the power supply. Taped it here just in case it was something that was needed. Don't know what this is. Okay, well, let's start taking this apart. I'm noticing definitely a good amount of corrosion on here from that battery leakage. Now, let's start by saying you shouldn't take apart switch mode power supplies unless you know how to do so safely. That's because after you've used one of these, especially if it's not working correctly, there are some high voltage caps that can give you a bit of a zap. I think in Europe, we're talking like 300 volts or so. So this thick piece of plastic comes off. Ooh, there's a good amount of dust in there. This corner had a little spacer right there. Oh, so did this one here. 2 spacers on the non-grounded points. These have grounds on them. Right, so I'm noticing even though this power supply worked, we have a bunch of corrosion on it. Now, I don't know if this came from the battery leakage or from leaking caps, so we're gonna have to investigate a little further. Now, from a construction standpoint, with these 4 screws out, I think we're gonna have to take these 2 screws off the top. There's a heatsink that's attached to the main PCB that's also attached to the top of the case here for cooling purposes. And then without a doubt, we're gonna have to remove this cable gland. So I'm gonna use this tool that someone sent me. It's the Pros Kit CP311. The good thing about that tool is it just makes it actually pretty trivial to get these apart. So we can just pop that off. My assumption is this board can go that way, and then we can lever it out. Looks like all of this stuff here is attached to the board, probably permanently soldered together, and there's a sticker that covers this that there are some fasteners underneath here. So I don't want to damage that sticker yet, so I want to try to get this out. So I'm thinking if we can get the board to slide that way, then I should be able to get it out from this point, and these wires can just stay connected, and I can kind of tilt this that way. I think I nearly have it here. There we go. I had to really push it with a lot of force that direction. All right, there we go. We're in. Wow, this case is it's in rough shape. Now, I'm very positive that I could say confidently that this corrosion is not from the caps. This is from the battery, and I think the corrosion on the board here also came from the battery leakage and not the caps. Take a look at this. This has exactly what we need. So when you see 2 main filter caps on the input side, that pretty much confirms that the power supply design is one that is ready to run at 110 volts or 240 volts. And look down there, see that pin that says 110? And this says 240. Moving this wire, what this essentially does is it creates a voltage doubler so that the input side of the cap, the high voltage DC, which is created by the mains going through a bridge rectifier, which is this black component down there, and then it gets filtered by these caps. Well, on 240 volt countries, you're getting something like 360, 370 volts, something like that across these caps. And that's what the switch mode power supply, which is this part over here, there's the chopper transistor, we have the switching transformer. Well, it's expecting to see that voltage, that DC voltage. Well, if we plug this into the mains here without changing this jumper, the voltage across these caps would be something like 160 volts, and it would be insufficient for the design of the switch mode portion. Well, if we flip this over, we can take a look at what's going on. This is the connection. These are the two pins. This is the one that it's currently connected to. That's the 240 volt pin. Notice that doesn't go anywhere at all. And yes, that's by design. When we move this to that pin, what it's doing is it's actually connecting part of the mains input in between the two high voltage DC caps. Well, that has the effect of basically doubling the voltage on this high voltage DC side, which gives the switch mode power supply exactly what it needs for normal operation. So I'm just going to disconnect this and move it over to the 110 volt pin. And that's all it takes to change this over to 110 volts. Literally the hardest thing is getting the PCB out of the case. Now let's take a look at this output side a little bit just to see what's going on. Look at this mess here. I'm going to try to clean this up a little bit. We have an adjustable potentiometer, probably adjust the 5 volt rail. I think I would say that is adjustable through the metal case if this board were properly mounted, so you can adjust things. Sorry, we're out of focus a little bit there. Now this is interesting. So this is for feedback, this device. Instead of an optocoupler, it's using magnetics to connect the low voltage side, which is this side over here, to the high voltage side, the primary side. So that's the feedback circuit. So as you load up this side, the 5 volt rail almost certainly, then this will relay that back to the controller on this side. If there is a controller, it might be just a simple transistor circuit. And this will regulate the 5 volt rail, and the other rails just sort of come along for the ride. Now, if you have one of these that isn't starting, what I would recommend is probably replacing this capacitor there. This is very close to this heatsink, which means it probably gets hot. That means that if it gets boiled and fails, then the switch mode power supply will not start up. Typically these caps survive. I mean, it's all pretty packed in here though, but these ones are usually always fine. This is your problem child if your capacitor or if your power supply doesn't start. And then as for all of these over here, this is on the output side, and yeah, this is all a mess here from that leaky battery. I'm amazed this power supply is still operational, but I guess, yeah, it didn't really eat away at anything. These are all super high quality caps. I don't suspect any of these to be problematic. All right, so for this corrosion, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just try to polish this away a little bit. I'm sure the traces are fine underneath since this power supply does work. I just want to expose the copper, get this sort of black corrosion off of these traces, and then we can just cover that up with a lacquer or retin it with solder. Okay, things are looking better. So now I need to try to get all this mess off. So IPA and a brush helps get all the mess off that I've made, little bits of corroded copper and solder resist. You can see that's what came off the board. Really the idea is as we clear this off, when this dries, the thing is we can try to tin this, but if any of the traces are broken, now you can see exactly where the traces are, and then we can just add little wire jumper links between the various points. You just want to make sure that everything is actually connected, and well, I'm pretty sure everything is still connected. Like I said, this thing still works. We just want to make sure that that corrosion that was happening on here is going to be minimized and not get any worse. Because those little black dots were the copper corroding. It was underneath the solder resist itself. And of course, that's corroding away. And eventually, well, theoretically, eventually that could break the trace altogether. And if we were dealing with leaky caps, this would be exactly the same situation. It would look exactly the same. And this would be the same process you would go through to try to clean up the board. Yeah, just get that off of there, wipe this up. There we go. This looks a whole lot better than it did. I feel more confident now that the corrosion is at least taken care of on this board, and these traces shouldn't get worse over time. Now, one thing I also want to add is while you have one of these boards out, you should look to see if you have any bad solder joints. And I have been looking over this board and everything looks completely fine. No issues whatsoever. But do pay special attention to any kind of hot spots. If you see the board has a dark spot, look to make sure that that joint is not bad and reflow it if it is. Time to try to reassemble this thing. Same problem as before. Got to slide this over. Oh, that's way easier to get it in. Yeah, you just sort of push it like that. There we go. All right, so on the bottom, those fasteners are in. Let's put these top ones in as well. Obviously, it goes without saying, I could try to take this apart fully. I have to get the sticker off to get these all removed. And then I could try to sand and completely re-powder coat or repaint this thing so it wouldn't look so bad with the corrosion. But you know what? I don't mind. Well, the reality is this computer was exposed to all of this because of the leaky battery, and that's just part of its history. All right, before I struggle to put this cable gland back on, we are going to test this, and I'm going to do this outside of the computer. This is the perfect excuse to use my DC electronic load. This is a 2-channel load, and I have another 1-channel one over there, so I can do 3 channels all at once. So let me get this thing set up. I've never actually used this to test a power supply, but for an old power supply like this with magnetic feedback circuit, you really need to load this up and not just turn it on outside of the computer, because these old power supplies generally aren't able to work with no load, and you could potentially damage the output stage if you don't have a load on there, just because the voltage can go a bit too high. Okay, so this thing has a little bit of an interface on the front. I set it for 2 amps on channel 1. I'm not even going to bother with the other channels because the 5-volt rail will be the only one that's regulated on this power supply. So that's about 10 watts for this power supply, which should be no problem whatsoever. So I have a couple nails put into the Molex connector. Red wire is 5 volts. That's going to channel 1 on the positive pin, negative pin. Then the ground is going to the ground on there. This is currently set to on. Here we go, let's see what happens. There we go, it's running. So it's giving 9 watts, no problem. It's outputting 4.9 volts as well. Now that's output, of course, is being measured on this through the voltage drop of all these wires. But what's good is we know that this thing is working. It's just running on normal 120 volts. Try one more time. Starts up. I'm curious. Let's put this down to 1 amp instead of 2. Let's see if that is let's see if it still works on 1 amp. Yep, but we have a higher voltage now. I'm not sure how powerful this thing is. It doesn't have any specs written on it. I'm sure it's in the service manual. Now we're at 3 amps. No, it won't start with 3 amps. I guess that's too much. 2 amps. Now it's not starting either. You can see it's supplying some voltage, but it's unhappy. Oh, there it started running there. Okay. So yeah, see it's at 2 volts. Oh, there we go. Now it's running. We can measure the voltage that's coming out of this thing here. 5.5, that's pretty high. I remember when it was on the Acorn, it was pretty high as well. Let me turn up the load. There we go. Now we're at 2 amps. Yeah, we're still at 5.5. It feels like it's regulating a little bit too high. I'm going to turn down the potentiometer that's in there. I'm going to use a plastic tool like this. Okay, well, I'm having trouble with the power supply actually. So it's running right now, but we're at 4.2 volts. And if I change the voltage regulation at all, it basically goes into a shutdown state where it just says clicking. Right now, yeah, we're getting 4.2 on the 5-volt rail. And according to this, I am hooked up to the 12-volt rail as well. I'm drawing about 4 watts on the 12-volt rail, and we are currently, I know it's hard to read that, but we're at about 10 volts. But if I try to change the regulation at all, like I said, it goes into a shutdown state. Like right there, it went into a shutdown state. In fact, the regulation pot is all the way at the very minimum right now, and it won't seem to run at anything higher than that. If I try to raise this up at all, it goes into a shutdown state. There it is. Oh, we're back. Weird. It's very sensitive. I think the pot might be bad. The pot was in the area with a lot of corrosion. 5.14 volts, and we are at 12.1 on the 12-volt rail. We're currently drawing, what I'm at, 1 amp on the 5-volt rail and 400 milliamps on the 12-volt rail. All right, now this seems to be working all of a sudden. Let's turn it off and on and see if it regulates properly. Yeah, comes right back up now. So I don't know what's going on. It was acting very strange, but now it's fine. So there we are, 5.16. I can increase the load on the 5-volt rail. Doing a pretty good job. Yeah, it's regulating for sure. Now I'm at 1.5 amps. So we're still at 5.1. That's with the voltage drop of the wires, of course. 12-volt rail went up a little bit. I know it's hard to read, but it's at 12.3. Usually what happens is as the 5-volt gets regulated, when you put load onto it, the 12-volt will raise up or go down depending on what's happening. So we're at 2.1 amps, 2.2 amps on the 5-volt rail. So we're only drawing about 10 watts on the 5-volt rail. And all is good. There we go, 3 amps right now. So we're still at 5.05 volts. 12 volt rail is at 12.4. So it's gone up a little bit because this is absolutely regulated right now. And we'll turn this up a little bit more. 3.5. Cool, let's turn this off and on, see if it starts. So it's off, on. Yes, comes right back on now. Okay, so whatever weirdness was going on, I think it was with the potentiometer, is fixed. So I'm going to leave it right here at this 5 volts. I'm just going to draw a circle around the hole that is for the adjustments. I think what I'll let this thing do is I'll just let it sit here for a while drawing 15 watts and just make sure that nothing goes wrong. But absolutely, without a doubt, 120 volt operation is working fine now. Right, so this thing's been sitting here for a while, slightly warm, especially right here where the heatsink is, but no issues, been working fine. Let's make sure it stops and starts without any problems. Yep, starts right back up. We're looking good, 5 volts. All right, very important. I have relabeled this. That way no one thinks this thing needs a step-up converter to be used here in North America. And now to get the cable glands back on. It's always easier to get it back in usually. Yep, that was way easier. There it is. Okay, there we have it. One tested and 120 volt converted power supply, and those traces have been repaired. You know what's funny? I never looked to see if these batteries worked. Oh, they do. 3 volts. Okay. It's obviously not going to store anything in the settings right now since it's unplugged. Okay, so while this is sitting here, let's take a look at the system RAM that's installed in this machine. So this is it, the zip memory. And actually, the front row of zip memory, which would have been the additional RAM that was added to this, looks like it's in sockets. So whoever did this upgrade actually installed zip sockets and then put these new zip memory chips in there, which is nice. In case any of this ever go bad, we can easily swap those out. These would have been the original ones, obviously, from the factory, so those aren't in sockets. But that's nice that those ones are. Here is the CPU upgrade that this thing has. So this is the ARM3 and it's running at 25 megahertz. So it's 50 megahertz divided by 2. And the original chip would have been in a socket a lot like this. I think it's a larger socket. And this has on the bottom side a reverse socket. So it looks like one of these PLCC chips and you would push it into the socket. And then that's how this works. So if I ever wanted to upgrade or downgrade this back to its original chip, I'd have to very carefully get this out and then install a PLCC original ARM2 chip. And because this has a crystal oscillator on it that overrides, I guess, the motherboard clock, the original CPU that's put back in that socket should then be running at the original 8 megahertz clock speed. Something else I noticed on this machine was this small board. Underneath this is actually a crystal oscillator, so it looks like it's a 4-pin can. This IC is there, and it connects to the board with these 4 pins. So I think I should slide this off and we can kind of look at what this is exactly. So there it is. It's a 36 megahertz crystal oscillator. And this little thing has 2 leads on it. One of them goes to the 5 volt rail on the module board. So this is an adapter that connects both this lead and the original 5 volt rail to the backplane board right here that had those slots on it. And then the other lead makes its way to the middle pin of this connector. The little board is a BeeBug VIDC expander. The VIDC expander consists of an oscillator 36 megahertz, which increases the clock rate of the VIDC, so that's the main video chip, making more modes available. These are saved as mode modules that can be loaded at startup. There's a lot of SVGA monitors, like a few of them here, to be used with the Archimedes. And here's a picture of the BeeBug, and that's absolutely the same exact one that's in this thing. And here's the README for it. The VME fits onto the Genlock links of PL4 or PL3A. The power flying lead goes from the VME to the 5 volt connector, and that's exactly how it was hooked up. Finally, the control wire should be soldered onto the middle pin of the aux IO connector, which is also exactly where it was connected up. All right, well, I think what I need to do now is we need to see this thing boot up again. So I need to reconnect everything and get the power supply reinstalled into the machine. And hopefully I didn't break anything with all that work I was doing. Just to validate the way these are connected up, black wire goes to 0 volts or ground, red wire goes to the plus 5 volts, yellow wire goes to plus 12 volts, and there's a purple wire which goes to the minus 5 volts. These connections go to the module backplane. We'll just need to connect the 5 volts wire, the red wire, to this brown wire, which goes to the VIDC enhancer. And there we have the connections, ground, plus 12, plus 5, and I had written them on the board, but it is labeled on this side as well, 5 volts, 12 volts, and ground. Okay, all the fasteners for the power supply are back in. The module backplane is in. I just need to plug in the battery. I obviously have the fan disconnected, which will be good. I can have a little peace of quiet without it. Here's my little video adapter made in part 1, Acorn on this side, 1084 on that side. If you want to make one of these yourself, of course, you can just watch part 1 and I show exactly how to do that. Okay, so what's really important for powering this up is checking that 5-volt rail, because remember I adjusted the voltage regulation and we don't know what the load is of the actual motherboard, but I assume it's going to be better than it was before. It's going to be a bit lower based on the adjustments I made. All right, let's turn this on. Of course, I just have normal 120 volt going into this. Let's see what we get. 5.1, okay, it's a lot better. I think it was like 5.3 before. So that's better. That's a lot better. I'm happy with that voltage. Okay, we're going to be using the retro tank for video input, so we'll just change this to SCART RGB. And here we go, 3, 2, 1. I saw a red screen there for a second. Okay, so this is doing exactly what it was doing in part 1. And I had to reset the video mode, so I got to plug the keyboard in, and we'll do the little sequence. With the keyboard connected, the original sequence I did is I held down the delete key while turning on the computer, which completely clears the NVRAM on the machine. But someone told me that holding down the R key has the effect of clearing only the video mode versus the rest of the settings. So let's give that a try. See if that does the trick. Oh, yeah, that's good. The manual said, oh yeah, look at that, we're in. Nice, that did the trick. Now, of course, all the settings got erased. I had the battery unplugged for a while since I last worked on this machine. I do know from my learning that hitting F12 takes us to the star commands prompt. But since the last part, I went ahead and downloaded the Archimedes test disk. Well, this is actually just some files I copied onto a PC formatted 720K disk. I think this has utilities on it that should allow us to set up this machine a little bit more easily. I'm also really happy to see that the computer's working. There's nothing broken since I muddled with it, because every time you take it apart, I'm always scared that something bad's going to happen. So according to the service manual, you type drive 0, and then you type CMOS LS. CMOS LS not found. All right, so I put that test disk into the A drive on my Windows 11 computer. Yeah, there's CMOS LS right there. I guess part of the problem is while this is formatted as a fat floppy 720K, this says here that it's got 1.38 megabytes of capacity. This is totally a 720K disk. What is happening? I right-clicked on here, I tried to format it, and it says, can't format this type of disk. Great. Let's see if we can format it with command line. Force it. Disk is making noise. Okay. So I think the problem is I made this disk on my Grease Weasel, and I have a blank 720K image, which I just image onto a disk to format it. But I bet you that blank image I made is not normal 720K. I must have done something special with it, maybe to create a high capacity double density disk. So maybe this will work better. And this format process we're doing right here is hooked up to a USB floppy drive on the computer. And while you can't right click into format for a 720K, you can do it with the command line. Formatted, so now it's only 713K, which is the correct amount. And here we go, I'm just gonna copy all those test files onto this disk again. It might be that, for instance, to run these utilities, I need to have this formatted as whatever the Acorn disk format is. Seems that all the files you download off the internet, though, are just archives that have the files themselves, not a disk image. But since I've never used an Archimedes disk yet, I don't really know exactly what format it needs to be. And I remember people saying on the forums, oh, just use a fat formatted disk and it will work. I kind of recall reading that if you format a disk on the Archimedes, you have more than 720K, you get like 800 or 880K of capacity. Looks like there is a format command here. But let's take this test disk where I just copied those files onto, and let's try that again. So it was drive 0, and I think it was CMOS LS. Bad drive. Wait, what does that mean? Let me reset the computer. I'm going to reboot the whole thing, because maybe it was still thinking it was that other disk, which was obviously not happy. CMOS LS. Bad drive immediately. And if I take the disk out, drive empty. So it knows the difference between drive full and drive empty. Okay. Well, let's try this format command. It's going to format 0 in E format, whatever that means. Let's see if this works. Okay, at least now, obviously I tried typing directory, that's not the right command. It did try to read the disk. I typed cat, and it showed us that, which I assume is the disk. Let's try it without the disk inserted. Yes, drive empty, put it back in. Cool. That's obviously what's on this disk now, but it looks like it's this ADFS format, which I'm sure my PC cannot read. And there's our error. A is not accessible, disk is not recognized. Yes, ADFS format not supported by Windows. So what I did is I'm using WinImage. I created a new 720K image, FAT format, and I dropped all these files on here. This is the test utility stuff again. I'm just going to write the image I just saved onto a floppy disk using my grease weasel. Okay, the disk has been written. Let's see if this works now. Okay, so we know cat was the command. Oh, wow, okay, so it was able to read this disk image without an issue. So let's see if the CMOS LS, oh, no run action specified for this image file type. Yeah, obviously this doesn't support long file names, which is totally understandable. Like RISCO OS is from before Windows 95, which had long file names. But why doesn't CMOS LS work? I don't know. It's so funny. I swear people were like, just copy it onto a PC disk. It's just totally going to work. Like maybe those files normally have like a certain bit set for executable or something like that. And it doesn't there. All right, I think I found something called Make Image. This is a Windows program, and it should allow me to take files and put them into an ADFS image that I can then write to the disk using Grease Weasel. Okay, I just gave this a try. So Make Image, I output to test ADF. The input folder was this test file type or file system ADFS. I tried loading it into HSC floppy emulator. That didn't work. Here's the file that it made, and I mean, I assume this is a disk image of some kind. Yeah, I mean, this looks like all this, the contents of it. I have no idea the actual physical format of the disk, so I'm just going to write it as a standard 80-track disk. I have a feeling if the hard drive were all configured in the Archimedes, it would be pretty trivial to copy files over because I could just use regular PC disks to copy archives over, and then I could uncompress them on the Archimedes itself, put them on disk, put them on the hard drive, do whatever I need to do with them. But right now with just the base OS, I don't know if there's any utility for unarchiving files in the ROMs, that is. And I guess we'll find out very soon, once it's finished writing this disk, if the Archimedes is okay reading the standard PC style format, as in the physical format of the disk with ADFS image written onto it. I have a feeling most of these utilities are designed to use with emulators and not with real hardware like we're trying to do here. All right, here we go. So there's no disk in there, so I put the disk in. Disk not understood. Yeah, of course it's not. All right, well, I do have this floppy, which I did format on the Archimedes. Let's just make sure that it is still readable. This should be an ADFS disk. Okay, good. So what I need to do is flux image this disk on the PC so I can understand what this ADFS format looks like. 80 tracks, two-sided. We can do track analyzer. Yeah, there it is. There are 5 sectors per track, and each sector is 1024 bytes. So let's try loading a raw disk image, and we're going to do 5 sectors per track. And instead of 512, we're going to do 1024, which with these parameters, we should get 819,000 or 820K or so. And we're going to try loading this ADF file. This is the 40K file we made with that utility. And this looks similar, doesn't it? And you can see there's data at the beginning there. Maybe this will work. If we write this as an HFE format, this is like a format that the Grease Weasel will be able to write with the custom disk format. So I'm going to try to write test ADF HFE, and we'll write this to drive B. Let's see what this does. And I'm concerned because looking at the size of this test stuff, it's 600 something K. Therefore, that utility that made the disk image clearly didn't include these directories. It only included these little files here. But I guess we'll be able to test to see if this custom disk image is going to be readable. So here we go, moment of truth. Nope. Can't believe it. Of course it didn't work. Of course it didn't work. And if I put this blank disk back in, of course that's going to work. Yep, there it is. All right, well, I think what I need to do at this point is I need to take a break. I'm going to stop the camera, and I'm going to try to figure this out because I've been doing a lot of Googling, and what you're watching on this video, it's very cut down, and I'm just hitting a lot of dead ends. I think there's a utility that I might need to use called ADFS Explorer. That's a Windows utility specifically designed to work with Acorn disks. And maybe with that, I can copy these files over. But I found a copy of that program, and it's a whole setup installer. It's not like a portable thing. And I really hate installing stuff that I don't know about on my lab machine because I'm worried it has malware or whatever in it. And I'm going to go off on a tangent here. I'm just going to rant a little bit. Yeah, just having the setup utility is great for like Microsoft Office, but for some little utility for like disks editing and whatever, it's super unnecessary. And the fact is, it just makes me not trust these programs, especially because it might be old and out of date. And I'd rather just have like a little portable exe you can just run. That's why I was trying to use that command line utility, which clearly doesn't really work exactly how we want it to, at least. So I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to stop the camera and try to figure this out. Well, it's been a few hours, and I have to admit, I've made no progress whatsoever. I found a bunch of threads on Stardock where people asking for this exact information, like how do they get stuff onto an ADFS disk and write it so they could use it on an Archimedes or BBC master. And well, it seems like there's a whole lot of different people saying a lot of different things, and I wasn't really able to get anything working. Believe it or not, I even went as far as to get the Archimedes emulator working on Windows. Unfortunately, the way the mouse works is extremely broken, and it's super frustrating to try to use this. And it's an old program from 2012, and you read the documentation, it says Windows mouse support is broken. And yes, it clearly is. You can capture the mouse like it's captured right here, but even this doesn't work. I can't really get around or move around and do stuff. I did manage to open up the host FS. In fact, I think I can do it here. So if we do cat, there is a test directory. That's the files. Those are the files. So what I was going to try to do was mount a disk image, and then I would copy these files into the disk image, and then I would write the disk image. But I couldn't even find a good blank ADFS disk image that this emulator can use. In fact, I mean, there's nothing in any of the menus about loading a disk, so I'm not even sure how to attach a disk image to it anyways. And I was reading the service manual for the Archimedes. It said to put the test disk in and run drive 0, type cmos ls, and then that should give you a program, I suppose, that runs. But it's saying you put the test disk in the drive and reboot the computer, so Control Shift and star key, then break. And then it says computer is an Archimedes and should show you the computer type. That's that comp type thing. Check front labels, press the space key to continue. And then we have a bunch of diagnostics and stuff that you can run. And so that's all from the test disk. But I really think this stuff can only work if it's an ADFS disk and it's not FAT formatted. Otherwise, it's really not going to be able to boot off of it. I'm sure I'm doing something wrong here, but I have to say it's not particularly clear. And I've spent, like I said, many hours reading through the forum posts. And there seem to be some people asking these same questions, but generally, I think everyone who's chit-chatting in there knows a lot about how these systems work and already have working Archimedes. It's not like they have just the one machine like I do. So they could probably take one of their other working machines to like make the test disk or something like that. I have a feeling if I just get the hard drive working on this thing, then I could just copy those files from a FAT formatted disk onto the hard drive. Then I format the disk as an Acorn ADFS disk, copy those files back onto it, and then maybe the system will be able to boot off that disk. And then maybe the system could actually boot off that disk and I could run those test suites. I don't even know if I need to run those test suites. This computer seems to be working totally fine, but I just thought it'd be handy to have that test disk handy for the future, for instance. Speaking of the hard drive, to configure it, these are the commands I got from ZIDE. Basically F12, which brings up the command prompt, and I just type this stuff in and we should be up and running. So these are the commands that ZIDE gave me, and I don't have the mouse plugged into the computer right now, so I can't move that around, but I'm going to try to do the reboot sequence. In fact, I'll just push the reset button on the keyboard, and let's see if that does anything. Doesn't look like it did anything. I don't notice anything. 0 is drive 0. That's the floppy drive. So that didn't seem to do anything. So I type configure. This is showing us all the possible options that we can type in. And we can type status in to see, I think, what's currently configured. And if we look at the bottom there, disks 1, drives 2, drive 4, dir cache 32K. And did I type this in correctly? This is what ZIDE told me to type. Looks like I'm missing something. Yes, I am. Oh, file system. Oh, I probably was somewhere else on the status page, which I guess we got to type status again. And I see there it is, file system ZIDEFS. That should be correct. Okay, so I just powered the computer off, powered it back on, and look, we have ID disk 5 and 4 now. Seems a bit odd, but they're there. I was doing a bunch of reading, trying to figure out, what I did wrong, and I figured this reset button on the keyboard basically worked the same as rebooting the computer or power cycling, I mean, but I guess not. Okay, so I don't have the mouse plugged in yet. It appears that that's the IDE disk, disk 4 right there. Looks like there's a copy of Elite on there and potentially some other stuff, so it actually works. So it definitely appears that it's working. We're slowly making progress. I feel like I'm stumbling around in the dark here. Like I simply have no idea how to do anything at all. Okay, I just plugged in my Microsoft mouse. Let's turn this on. Okay, it's lit up, so it's working, hopefully. Okay, here we go, initializing. Yes, we have a mouse pointer finally. So ID disk 4. Look at that, look at that. Let's check out the README. Please ensure you copy the contents of the ZIDE onto a floppy disk. It will allow you to partition or format a new drive in the event of failure. Well, that's probably something that I should do right now because I've been having so many issues with the floppy drive stuff. So let's check out the floppy drive. Okay, it looks like it's blank, which is completely fine. Okay, so it says copy the contents of this folder to the floppy drive. So we'll select this stuff. Can I drag it? Yes, that worked. Nice. The contents of this disk are targeted towards RISCO OS 3.11, which I think is what we have on this machine. If using a later version, use the Uniboot files in the extras folder. Okay. So interesting is pushing the down arrow doesn't actually scroll, but actually, yeah, it looks like you could scroll just using the scroll bar. Maybe we can't scroll because that's all the text there is. What about this? Okay, yeah, so it works normally. I guess there's something to scroll to. That's funny. I would expect that to be full size if this was all the text, but the down arrow doesn't do anything. But if I grab this, notice, yeah, there's nothing more except for that. Okay, anyways, so we copied that stuff onto the disk, which is this. H-form. Okay, so this is an app. I know everything with an exclamation point is an app. Format which drive? Well, I don't want to really format anything right now. So how do I board out of this? I'm going to just push the reset button and call it good. All right, what's on disk 5? Nothing. Okay, disk 4, 2 things. Well, let's try Elite. This will be the first game that I run on this machine. Here we go. Do you have a high resolution monitor? I'm going to say no, because we are running PAL mode right now. Okay, there it is. Is this normal? It goes down here. Anyways, there it is. The game is running. I don't know how to play Elite. People are going to be shocked knowing this. But look how fast it is. Wow. Game designed 1984, but this is a 1991 port to RISCO OS, obviously. Unfortunately, I am such a noob at this, I have no idea what I'm doing. Whoa, look at those graphics. Now remember, this thing's accelerated. I thought we'd be hearing sound. Oh, whoa. Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine. Okay, I've like totally lost control. Okay, I see what's going on. There we go. Let's get back under control again. Whoa, look at that 3D graphics. Okay, I'm really struggling. It's like the mouse is inverted from the way my brain works. Oh dear. So that's the sun, obviously. So this rotates the ship left and right, and then up and down. I guess there's no way to turn the ship. Oh, I can fire. Okay, we know sound is working. Firing at the sun, everyone. That's going to do nothing. It's a planet, obviously, with its moon. And am I rotating the ship right now? No, I think I'm in pretty good. Yeah, that rotates the ship up, down. No, obviously I'm not supposed to fly into the planet. There we go. I totally don't know what I'm doing here. Front view, rear view. I'm pushing some of the F keys here. That does stuff. Ooh. All right. Local system. These are all just pushing through the F keys here to see stuff. Cargo hold. Leave. Market. Oh, and that exited the game. Or at least it didn't exit completely. I assume the game is still running. We just ended up back at the desktop. Yeah, F12. Okay, that takes you to the desktop. Okay, so I know if I push the middle button, this gives us stuff. Commander Jameson, status clean, rating harmless, modified. And there it is. About this program, Elite. Version 1.14 from 1995. All right, so we'll quit the game. So I ran a game. I really don't know what I'm doing. I really have to spend some quality time with it to try to get my head around it. Because here's a README file. This copy of Elite is for the Archimedes and was released on Ian Bell's website. It's free and has the password protection present in the commercial version removed. This should run from a RISCO OS 2 A310 all the way to a StrongArm RISC PC. Very nice. Oh, there's a manual for the game too, so that would certainly be something I would need to dig into if I'm going to properly understand how to play this game. Okay, we're back on the hard drive here. I clicked on apps, so we have some stuff here. HD speed, are these like some diagnostics or something? This program is unregistered. Drag this icon to a window on the drive to be tested. So we could drag that here. Now look at these results. I have no reference to know what's fast and what's not fast. I just know that there's numbers there. All right, well, I stopped it. 1.5 megs per second. Not bad. Union Jack. Ooh, 1987. What does this run like on the original 8 megahertz chip? Is it just as fast as that? Because that's quite slick. I wonder if I can exit to go back to the desktop. F12 doesn't do anything. In delete, that did go back to the desktop. Escape did go back. Let's try that one more time. Yep, escape seems to be the only key to do anything there. Let's try molecule. Ooh. Ooh, that's like 50 frames per second. So I don't know, F for faster, S for slower. This really must be pre-rendered, I have to imagine, right? Because it looks like it's ray traced, especially with that sphere in the background. So this seems to be kind of oh, you can really change the speed, I see. 10. And we can speed this up just so that's as fast as it can go. And yeah, speed 1. That looks really nice and smooth though. But yeah, I just kind of wonder if this is pre-rendered or what. It is a demo from Acorn back in the day. I assume escape, press space or click mouse to exit. Okay. I'm curious if we go to info, size, 2048, are those blocks? Are those K? What is that exactly? If we go and we look at the Union Jack, on the other hand, this says 2048 as well. Feels like that's a block size or something. It might be because it's a very large disk. That's the minimum size for any of these. Okay, so if I try to run Warfare, and that doesn't do anything. What is this exactly? Warfare and application? I don't know, it doesn't really tell me anything. I tried this FCFS filer. This application is shareware. Okay, make image. Oh, is this for making disk images? It looks like it's a little bit corrupted here. Multitasking? It looks like we can make an image. So remember, I have the disk inside the drive. It's the utilities for the IDE card. Let's just make a standard image type. See what happens. To create an image, drag the icon to the display. Okay. All right, so I assume we drag this here. And that will make the disk image, yes, right to the hard drive. Yeah, there it is, 819,200. I kind of remember that's the exact amount of bytes we saw when I tried to create the disk image in the disk utility on my PC. All right, so let's rename this. Now it's interesting, so use the middle button and then you just hover over this and then it allows me to type. This is the ZIDEFS util. If we double click on that, oh, it actually opens it. That's interesting. If we go to info, it does take up the full size. It has the file type file core, which I assume is this utility that's running. So it's running right here. If we quit this, does this still work? Yeah, it still works. So I don't know if there's a module loaded or something like that. But I suppose my problem is now is I want to copy this file over to my PC, but I don't know how to do that. Because I can use a fat file system disk, but at 720K, that disk image is not going to fit. I could compress it, but I don't know how to uncompress it on the PC. The utility that made this had a way to make a compressed file format that would fit, but then how do I decompress it so I could use the grease weasel to write that disk in case in the future the disk goes bad? I guess the reality is all I need to do is now that I know this disk has the IDE utilities on it, that I just need to relabel it and write protect it, and I'll make a disk image of this on my grease weasel, so I'll have that in the future. Okay, so looking back at the stuff that's on here, FS speed, what does that do? Okay, so we have another performance tester. Yeah, the hard drive LED is just on solid. And there are results, 1.5 megs per second, just like it was on that other test. Info zip, what's this do? It says idle. Help? Can't find help, okay. Is this an archiver? Oh, it is an archiver. Info zip. Ooh, maybe this is what I need. So like new archive, new. Oh, same thing as before. That we have to drag the file to where we want it to go. It's kind of annoying because just moving the mouse off that window made it go away. So we're going to call this ZIDEFS utils.zip. And then we save this here. Can't create as it already exists as a directory. Oh, yeah, I did call it the same thing. Zip. We'll just put zip there. So like that. Nope. Wait, what? Disk. I'm just gonna call it disk. I don't know. I don't know what it's telling me. That worked fine. Weird. Okay, so there's our archive. So theoretically, I could put this here. Adding. It's gonna compress this file, the disk image, right? It should be a lot smaller. But what exactly? It's busy. Okay, it's running. Oh, so it's like, yeah. So, yep, there it is, deflated 96%. Okay, so it shrunk it big time. The question is this a normal zip file? Can I just extract this on the PC or what? What format is this? So our disk, if we open it, there's our disk image inside. And I think we can go to info. There it is, 33K. Yeah, nice and compressed. I guess this is using zip because it's talking about DOS, stuff like that in here. Unix zip files. Okay, so maybe that's what I needed. Okay, so I think what that means is I can make a normal fat disk, 720K, copy all those test utilities onto that, put it in this machine, copy it to the hard drive. Now that the hard drive works, then I can just make a new ADFS disk, format it, that is, copy all those files onto that, and then that should be a bootable test disk that this computer can use for diagnostics or whatever purposes those tools do. I don't even know if I need them, because obviously this computer works well. But I'm just kind of thinking through some of the gymnastics I have to go through to get those utilities onto this machine. Okay. Okay, so to rename this, let's do that. I'm going to try to rename this ZIDEFS zip. Okay, that did work. I don't know why it wasn't letting me create the file. It kept telling me that it already existed. Odd. What's all this stuff? Looks like some extra utilities, I suppose. We've got some fonts, sent icons, squash, font print. That sure looks like an Apple laser writer. Okay, we got a couple utilities here. A 65 host. Is this an emulator for the 6502? Yes, sure looks like it is. I wonder how we get back. Certainly not the F12 key. Okay, I have no idea what I'm doing here. I thought I could type star basic and it would put me in basic, but I don't think that's the case. Unless we're in basic right now. Are we? Oh, we're already in basic. Oops, 20 go 210. Oh, no wonder I couldn't do it. That's so funny. How do I break out of this? Oh, I pressed the break key. That just seemed to reboot the computer. I know I learned a little bit about using the BBC computers. I've totally forgotten so much of it. At least I do know that I'm in BBC Basic here. And obviously, we're running like 6502 code. So it does seem to be trying to access the disk drive. If I do star dot, it says drive empty. I think if I like put this disk in there, for instance, think this should be able to read this disk. Of course, these are all Archimedes programs here, so there's nothing I could do. But theoretically, I could write a basic program and actually save it to this disk. So we have our little basic program there, and let's try saving this as test.bas. Save is not the right command. Is it dsave? I kind of recall that chain was the command to load a program from disk, but I don't know. Oh, unless we use star save because this is a ROM-based command. No, I'm not sure how to get out of this. I'm just going to push the reset button and we'll see what that does. That took us back to RISCO OS. I forgot where we were even looking, but why don't we check out this machines icon? SMI not known. Okay, that's not going to work. PACDIR, RAFS, these are all things I looked at. SCSI test, we don't have a SCSI device. Connector for serial stuff. We have the extras directory. Spark plug has a very similar icon to this zip disk here. Oh, I see. Yeah, these are all zips things here. What does spark plug do? Oh, this seems to be a disk compression or disk decompression utility. Yeah, these are ARC format, and I think 7-zip supports ARC format. So I guess if you compress something with this, you can use it, or you can access it on the PC. I think I was in this directory R03, which I think is RISCO OS 3. Oh yeah, here we go. This is where we were looking. So that's the 65 host. Tube, I think would be for an external 6502 interface. I wonder if you run this and the computer will act like it's a 6502 with an ARM processor connected to the tube interface. So it's acting like a BBC with the extra ARM processor connected to it, which was how it was originally developed before the Archimedes line came out. We got a clock utility, very nice. HForm, that was that hard drive format utility. Maestro, is this a music program? I assume it is. Maestro music player, Acorn computers. I wonder if there's some pre-composed music, because I don't know what I'm doing. Oh, I click the middle button so we can save, print, play. Well, what'd that do? It's very, very quiet. Oh, that's right. I think I figured out that there's something wrong with the audio output in part one. I completely forgot about that. Okay, quiet beep or loud beep? Okay, so if I hit this loud beep, right, okay, maybe it's working. If you happen to know more about the Archimedes, should this be so quiet on loud beep? When I pick like that, I could barely hear it. I mean, it's audible, but it's certainly not very loud. In fact, are these supposed to sound that way? No, that can't be, right? I don't know. I assume those should have different sounds than what we're hearing there. They all sound the same. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so we go back to this and we try to play again. It was kind of making like, it was actually making like laser sounds as opposed to just playing notes. That didn't sound right. Now it's playing with the laser sound. I'm sorry you can't really hear that, but it was like pew pew. It was making like pew pew noises. All right, so that was Maestro. How about Patience? This a game? What is this, like solitaire? Yep, looks like solitaire. Didn't know it was called Patience, but that must be a UK thing. Okay, so we can drop that there. Yes, we can. All right, this works exactly like you would expect solitaire to work. Well, unfortunately, my playing here sucked. Kind of stuck. Can't get anywhere. All right. Deal hand, resign, new pack. That's cool. There's an Acorn logo on that pack. Ooh, look at that. A mailbox or a post box. Leaning Tower of Pisa. That's funny. And the original one that we had. Okay. We got scientific calculator. Looks like you can do binary, octal, hexadecimal, decimal, and you can do these modes as well. Yeah, okay. Functional. Sweet. After always remember that the applications stay running even when you close them by clicking the X. Oh, there's our music that we could listen to for Maestro. So let's give that a try. Maybe we could drag this to here. Yes, that worked. Play. Okay. Well, that works. And obviously this is multitasking. Definitely feels a bit sluggish, but of course I'm used to modern computers. That is cool. Very, very cool. I can't remember what this button does. Oh, that enlarges it. Okay. Because there's this button, which sends it to the back. So if you're trying to work on something like this, like your calculator, then you can. So we're running all sorts of utilities all at the same time. What if I run the 6502 emulator? No. Oh, it's still running. It was for a second there, but then I had to give up. And I don't know how to exit out of this except for hitting the reset button. So I've actually figured out how to make this test disk, and it definitely relies on the hard drive in this thing actually working. So a couple things. I found that formatting a 720K disk in Windows results in a floppy that can't be read with the Archimedes. I don't know why, but that's just the case. If I create a 720K image in WinDisk and then write it with the Grease Weasel, it works fine. So I did that and I copied these two ARC files I downloaded onto this disk image. One is test disk, which is that Archimedes test disk I was trying to use earlier, the one I couldn't get working. And then BeeBug, which is the software that goes with the little VIDC enhancer module. And I was able to read that disk without any issue on the Archimedes and copy them into this archives folder. Then in the extras folder, there was the program called Sparkplug. We run that. That adds this little icon down here. And now these ARC files are double clickable. Before they just had a little white generic icon. If we double click this now, there's all the files from that test disk, the stuff I was trying to copy on here before. So if we go to drive 0 and we do format, And it gives us a few different formats we can pick from. I don't actually know what the difference in E, D, and L is. We saw E earlier when I was using the command line. We can also do Atari format and DOS format. And I'm just going to name it test disk. We'll hit format. I just want to point out that this thing is not like an Amiga where there's coprocessors. Therefore, it's pretty sluggish while it's formatting a disk. At least it lets you do something though, which if you think about in the late 80s when this came out, PCs and Macintoshes, basically you couldn't do anything while it was formatting. And this thing allows you to actually do some stuff. Incidentally, I'm just checking out how much free space is on these two hard drives. It's doing a verify process right now, by the way. So IDE disk 4 is 500 megabytes and IDE disk 5 is also 500 megabytes. There goes the verify process. So you can still multitask while it's doing stuff. It's just kind of sluggish. A bit like Windows 95 is, to be honest, while you're formatting a disk. Anyhow, there is our test disk archive. This is what I downloaded. Let's open the floppy disk, which should just be blank. It is. I figured out if you want to multi-select things, you don't hold down Shift or Control, you right-click, and that allows you to multi-select stuff. But we can also middle-click and just say Select All, and then we can drag this stuff right onto the disk. And it's pretty cool, I have to say. So essentially, when you're running this little utility, which has a different icon now, the Sparkplug thing, it turns archive files into what are like file systems. It's super ultra modern. It's basically how Linux or Windows is now. When you double click on a zip file, for instance, it just opens like a folder. This thing was doing it, well, I don't know what year this utility is from, this Sparkplug utility, but amazingly, it was doing it such a long time ago, which is honestly freaking cool. And my assumption is what you would do is you would have this auto start when you boot the computer. That way, that is always just running there in the background. And then anytime you're opening up an archive file, it just opens magically like a folder. I'm not sure how different RISCO OS 3 is from RISCO OS 2, and I think RISCO OS 2 was the first version of RISCO OS that came out. And I have to say, if RISCO OS 2 had a lot of these functions and it came out, you know, a couple years before this version 3.10, I mean, that's pretty amazing. That's some pretty forward-thinking stuff, really. Anyhow, there are all our files. Interesting is I noticed this test file has a, I guess, 2010 date, and it doesn't know how to handle it. ADFS must not support dates that late. Anyhow, what we're seeing now is finally, after all that fiddling earlier, there are all our files on this ADFS floppy disk, test disk, which theoretically means I should be able to run some of those programs now that I was trying to run before. That's wild. So I selected drive 0 just like I did before, and I type cat, it just says bad drive. What if I take the disk out? Cat, bad drive. Right, I don't think it's actually selecting the floppy drive for some reason. Okay, I typed in drive 4, and that's absolutely showing us the hard drive there. This is one of the hard drives. And drive 5 should be the blank hard drive. Oops, cat. So what I don't understand is drive 0 I thought was the floppy drive. I mean, it has a :0. Maybe I type dismount. Okay, that just made the disk go away. I'm going to take it out, put it back in. There it is. Immediately comes up, test disk. Why can I not read the floppy disk from the command line, and yet it's working perfectly in the GUI? Okay, I have an idea. I just removed the IDE interface card. Drive not found. What? I feel like something is configured in the NVRAM that's somehow messing with the floppy drive. Maybe I should just do the complete factory default on this thing. So I'm going to turn the computer off, hold down the delete key, turn this on. I'm just going to let it completely erase everything. There we go. We got that red screen. I think that's what that's telling us. Okay, now we type drive 0. Okay, that didn't give us an error. I'm going to put the disk in. Now we type cat. Oh, look at that. It actually read the disk. Okay, CMOS LS. This is what I was trying to do. Look, it actually freaking works. Unbelievable. Load or save the CMOS RAM. I don't know. Let's hit save. Insert save CMOS data. Replace test disk and press spacebar to continue. Well, I never took it out because I wrote to the test disk. I'm pressing spacebar. It's not doing anything. Oh dear. All right, let's try dealer menu. Ooh, dealer test menu. A300, A400 tests. Modules and upgrades, load, save CMOS RAM, keyboard test. I don't know, let's try keyboard test. All right, caps lock LED is on. Yes, it is. Is that all it literally does? Check the LED is off. Yes, it's off. Scroll lock is on. Off, yes. Num lock's on. Off. Left, middle, right. Ah. Mouse test passed. Main keyboard test. Does it want us to push these keys? Because I'm pushing keys and absolutely nothing is happening. I wonder if this is incompatibility with RISCO OS 3, the ROMs that are in here, versus this is expecting older ROMs. I'm going to reboot the computer. All right, let's try the tests here. Directory A300 400/1 not found. Really? There's an A300 directory, but I wonder if that's because this is comp type. This is oh, it doesn't even know what this is. This has got to be a ROM thing. Check your front label. I guess it's supposed to be able to detect out of the ROMs, like if this is a 400/1 or 400 or 300. Well, I guess it doesn't quite understand that, does it? How about the module menu? What does that give us? I/O module and MIDI upgrade. Well, we don't have that. Hard disk upgrade, MIDI module, ROM module, dual floppy drive test. Well, we don't have any of those. So this test disk, unknown or missing variable. Right. Okay. This test disk, it doesn't really work. I realize now that pushing the reset button on the keyboard, which is what I just did, doesn't really reset the computer because this is inside a directory. I actually don't know the command to go backwards a directory right now. And the funny thing is, obviously hitting the reset button, I thought it would reset the computer to, restart, but no, it didn't. We're still in that directory. So whatever changed the directory is like in the RAM or whatever, and that's still there. Okay, I just did the keyboard reboot sequence. Let's see if that actually rebooted anything. That did. So the hardware button on the keyboard doesn't actually reboot anything, but the key sequence does. All right, well, today I learned on this machine with this version of RISCO OS, the test disk is completely useless. And I'm sure people who are watching are probably screaming at their screen, telling me that while I struggled to try to get the disk made. But I know how to make the disk now, so I'm at least pleased with myself that I figured out something. I actually figured out something. So I'm going to put back in the IDE interface. Hopefully it comes back to life, and I might have to type in those configuration commands again, which wouldn't be the end of the world. No big deal. Oh, wait a second. Of course, it's not going to work. I did that factory default by holding down delete when I powered up the machine to get the disk working. Why wasn't the disk working without that factory default? I don't know. I assume it had something to do with that driver that was trying to load, and even when the IDE card was removed, it was still somehow affecting it. Okay, those are the configure commands. It won't do anything, and if I push the reset button on the keyboard, I know it won't do anything. It's still not going to work. Nope, nothing. But if I do the keyboard sequence, maybe this will do it. Yes, there it was. That's the key. Reset button on the keyboard doesn't actually do anything. It's the keyboard sequence or a power cycle that does. Now, when it comes to the VIDC enhancer, this is the mode utility for editing modes. And this just lets you completely make your own custom modes. And you can see the frame rate and the line frequency, and you can just completely customize all of this stuff. 31 kilohertz line frequencies, that's the horizontal, and this is the vertical. I mean, you can completely do all sorts of different things on here, obviously. And I'm curious if there's a configuration anywhere of parameters that I can configure in here, because it would be really cool, for instance, to have 640 by 200 NTSC mode. I created this one called NTSC, and it was basically running at 640 by 200, and the frame rate is 59.94, so that's close enough. 15.6 kilohertz. This is all very, very close to NTSC. And we hit OK. What's this going to do? Earlier, this was mostly working. Okay, it works, but it's all stretched, and it's actually going off the edges of the image. Oh, well, you know what? Look at that. I was just fiddling around for quite a while at 18 megahertz. We have this 848 by 200 pixel mode. I think it's a little squished, but it's running at 60 hertz at least. And it doesn't look like any part of it is actually cut off. I'll call this NTSC 848 mode 30. But here's my question, and I think people who know more about the system can answer this. If I open up the apps folder, remember we have stuff that's full screen like Molecule? If I run this, I assume it's going to just go back to the normal PAL mode. Yeah, it certainly did. Or actually not. It says it's running at 75 hertz, 23 kilohertz. How is that possible? How is the RetroTink even sampling this? Well, my assumption was that this would basically switch into like an original screen mode, like a PAL mode. And if you're running like a VGA monitor that didn't support those screen modes, it wouldn't work. Let's try Union Jack. See how it's sort of no signal means it's switching modes here. This one also says 75 hertz. I don't know. I don't understand. How is this even working? How is the RetroTink supporting this? This is more like I would assume, 59.97 hertz. So let's quit out of this program, which I assume will drop us back into PAL mode. No, it still says 75 hertz. I'm mega confused. If we go to the built-in configure app, I can turn this off. We can do normal, and we can do automatic mode selection. And I think like 12 is the normal mode, and yeah, this is standard PAL mode here. And it still says 75 hertz. No, that's just not possible. That's totally not possible. Okay, well, I've gotten way off on a tangent. The question still stands. If you create a custom video mode, you're using a VGA monitor, for instance, or some other high-res monitor, and you run an application or a game that is designed just to run in the normal PAL resolution, so it's just override the video mode you're in and switch back to PAL. That's kind of like how the Amiga would work if you were using productivity modes that are the high-res VGA compatible modes. If you ran a game, it would just switch back to standard 15 kilohertz mode. And if you didn't have a monitor that supported it, you would just get no signal. If we go back to our NTSC mode, like we're in now, I have a feeling if I run anything like, say, Elite, it totally will not work properly. Let's just try it. And in fact, remember we run this and asked if we have a high-resolution monitor? Let's just hit yes and see if it stays in this mode. No, it certainly doesn't. Definitely switch to what looks like normal PAL resolution. 312p, it still shows 75 hertz. I think this is a problem with the RetroTink. We can ignore that. We're definitely in a regular PAL video mode here. But without a doubt, my 60 hertz NTSC, fake NTSC mode is not what the game is running in. So I guess that means you're pretty much stuck having to use a multi-sync monitor if you want to have a flicker-free desktop experience and then still run games like this, because it's going to switch to a 50 hertz mode. At least when I go back to the desktop, it definitely switches back to the high-res mode, well, NTSC mode at least. Well, I think that's going to be it for my struggle bus experience of using Archimedes so far tonight. I'm going to end this video. I know I didn't get to everything I said I was going to get to. I didn't get to trying to get the mouse working. I'd like to get this mouse rewired, and obviously I need to convert my monitor over, but that's pretty easy. We're just talking about changing the door and changing a sticker. I'm glad to have at least figured a few things out. Like now I know how to get files transferred onto this thing, uncompress them, copy them onto the disks if necessary. I'm glad I got the hard drive working. I'm slowly kind of figuring things out with the Archimedes. Now let me try to compose my thoughts a little bit on what I think about the Archimedes so far. Just having played with it for several hours today, fooling around, playing games and stuff like that. One thing I have to say, it's obvious that this machine is quite powerful. And I don't mean just the processor. I mean the whole OS. There's some cool things in there that really feel like they were ahead of the time when you look at the date that this thing was doing that stuff compared to other machines. But one area I have to say that this machine was definitely not ahead of the curve is user-friendliness. A Macintosh is sort of the gold standard when it came to early 90s or late 80s machines when it came to user-friendliness. And maybe that came at the expense of some power, as in power user power, like flexibility. But I gotta say, like System 7, which I think is the contemporary OS to this, was so simple to use and very easy for anyone to figure out. You could give a Mac to anyone, even then, and they would pretty quickly figure it out or use the little tutorial disk it came with and be up and running. This machine with that whole star command line, it's daunting. It really is daunting. And I've talked about this before, but I'll mention it again, is that when I go into Stardot or other forums that specialize in Acorn machines, it feels like pretty much everyone who's in there was a power user for Acorn stuff back in the day. So they know all of this stuff like the back of their hand, or at least they're very familiar with it. So to them, it's kind of second nature. But to someone like me who's never used any of this stuff, except for some of the BBC machines, but that's just recently, it's still very foreign to me. And the GUI stuff is actually really easy and intuitive on this machine. But you hit F12, all of a sudden I feel super lost. Like I was able to figure out cat to look at a directory listing, but I still don't know how to change directories because it doesn't use the CD command that pretty much everything else does in the world when it comes to command lines. And I know a lot of that just comes down to familiarity or lack of familiarity on my part. So using Windows, for instance, even like back in the 90s, was pretty easy because I already kind of knew DOS and I already knew CP/M, and really those were just running on top of those OSs. So editing a text file to add some strings or whatever to like load a driver, that all seemed relatively easy and straightforward. But with Archimedes, it's definitely like an evolution of the older Acorn 8-bit machines, and the BBC Master had NVRAM on it, so it had all the configuration variables and stuff that weren't there on the earlier machines. So that carried over to this, but this thing is way more complex than the BBC Master. So you look at like all the configure stuff, and there's just so much stuff there. And even when it comes to this IDE card, what's not really clear to me is how does it even know those commands I typed in? Where is it loading those drivers? There must be a ROM chip on this IDE card, so that way when you enter those commands into configure, that it knows what to do with those and it knows how to load the drivers and then talk to this piece of hardware. That mode of operating is just a little bit different than what I'm used to, because see, say on the Amiga, like an early plug-and-play system, you plug the card in, has a ROM, it pretty much auto-loads the driver automatically, and if there's a hard drive, it just shows up. If you take the card out of an Amiga and you put it into a different Amiga with the same hard drive connected, it just will work as well because the driver auto-loads. So I struggle a little bit with this because obviously this thing has like plug-and-play, there's no jumpers, there's no IRQs, none of that stuff like a PC, but yet you plug it in and things don't just work, because you have to know like what commands to type in, or assume there would be like a setup floppy disk you would run and it would type those commands for you. Now, I've mentioned the Amiga a few times because my frame of reference for technology at this point in time was the Amiga. I bought an Amiga 2000 around 1992, and it had I think a 40 megahertz 68030 accelerator in it. So a lot of what I know from this time when it comes to non-PCs and non-Macs is the Amiga. So I can't help but compare my Amiga 2000 to this machine. Well, a couple things right off the bat is I can't really get a feel for how powerful the processor is in this, and this has that 25 megahertz ARM processor, and no doubt it is very powerful. But one thing that is kind of obvious to me is that the lack of co-processors in the Archimedes means that the processor is doing all the heavy lifting of everything. So when you're playing music and you're copying a file, the computer is really slow and sluggish. Now that is better, like I said, than Macintoshes at the time because they couldn't multitask at all, and PCs as well couldn't multitask at all. But my Amiga, on the other hand, I mean, you know, you could play music, you could copy files, you could download stuff off the internet, and I had a serial connection in college, so that's what I was doing, and it was seamless. Everything was like butter. It just, there was no slowdown, everything was fast, the animations were so slick and everything. So while this machine undoubtedly has more computational power, still the lack of coprocessors means that it doesn't really feel as fast as an Amiga. And I'd have to imagine if you bought one of these, or you bought, say, an Amiga 1200 at the time, which I assume they were kind of contemporary, and you were using them side by side, the Amiga 1200 with its AGA graphics probably felt faster, just felt faster because of all the multitasking abilities that it had. While this computer, on the other hand, you know, the CPU's doing that heavy lifting. Now, I know there's a bunch of games that have been ported from the Amiga to the Archimedes, and it'll be very interesting to see how those perform, because I have a feeling they're going to perform really well on this machine. And the fact that this thing doesn't have the coprocessors to do hardware scrolling and all that means that the CPU is doing that heavy lifting. And well, we saw the Molecule demo, and that thing was rotating around at perfect 60 frames per second, or 50 probably, because it was running in PAL mode. Meaning the graphics subsystem and the CPU and the memory has enough bandwidth to really push those pixels around at high speed. So I'm assuming games like Zool, which I think is ported to this, which normally runs at buttery smooth 60, 50 frames per second on the Amiga, probably does on here as well, which just shows the power that is available on this thing. Now, please take everything I'm saying here with a grain of salt. I only have a handful of hours using this machine, and I haven't really even run any applications on here other than just sort of play around with what's on the hard drive. So my question from the first video still stands on the Archimedes. Please recommend software, games, things that really push the limits of this machine. And also please recommend ways of getting that software onto this thing, because that's, again, going to be a real struggle. I don't really want to copy everything floppy by floppy, and I don't have a network card, so I can't do it over the network. So a way to maybe hook the hard drive interface or the hard drive module up to another computer so I could copy that way would be useful. Or even if there was a serial connection and I could just let it run all night, transferring stuff onto this hard drive, that would work for me as well. Hopefully I've been able to express my thoughts on the machine, at least so far, in a way that makes sense, and I don't come across as a total jerk. We'll see when I edit the video if I have to redo the outro, but it's been really fun so far and an interesting thing. And I wish I could get over the learning curve of like learning how to use the command line. That's my biggest problem with this machine right now. The Achilles heel of this machine, frankly, is the command line. So I'm hoping that the the Archimedes manuals that came with this thing, or maybe the RISCO OS 3 manuals will give me the tips that I need to kind of feel a bit more comfortable in the command line. All right, I think I'm going to stop rambling because I'll just keep going on forever. I'm not running off a script, everyone. I'm just going off what's in my head here. So thanks, Mike, for getting this machine to me, Sajad, and everyone else who contributed to getting this computer here. Again, it's super cool. Oh, one thing I want to add is that our local meetup in Portland, a bunch of people were like, hey, are you going to bring the Archimedes? Because none of them have seen one. So yes, now that it's converted to 120 volts, our next meetup, I will be bringing this computer and the 1084 monitor, and hopefully I'll get a couple games on here by then, and people can use it and poke around a little bit, and maybe I'll be able to explain things a little bit, maybe. Anyways, thanks everyone who got this thing to me. Thank you for watching. Thank you for putting up with my struggle bus. I'm sure it was very difficult for people who are used to the Archimedes, and then hopefully people who aren't familiar with this machine kind of got a little taste of the machine at least, hopefully. All right, that's going to be it. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks to my supporters. Subscribe if you haven't already. YouTube stuff, like, subscribe, whatever. Anyways, okay, that's that. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.